It's long been said that there are no original ideas, and there's some truth to that. While creativity is still a must as an author or creator of any kind, anyone who looks closely enough will realize that most ideas, even seemingly creative ones, are an amalgamation of what came before. By taking previously popular concepts and putting a fresh twist on them, one can create something that's both comfortingly familiar and refreshing, and Twilight is no exception. Despite the bad rep it gets, I do feel Twilight had original ideas, in addition to the ones we've seen dozens of times, and many books which came after, including those people are raving about now, continue to use both the ideas Twilight popularized and the ones it borrowed. From enemies to lovers to fated mates, you can't pretend Twilight hasn't affected the genres of YA, fantasy, or romance. In fact, there are whole genres, such as shifter romance, which are clearly emulating the Twilight model. But if Twilight has been an influence on current trends, Twilight itself was influenced by what came before. Stephenie Meyer is a lover of the classics, and in making Bella a bookworm, she revealed not only the books she loved, but those which influenced her work. Some ideas are timeless, and this benefited Twilight. Whether you think it's terribly written or not, its use of classic plotlines, ideas, and tropes pulled people in, and there are at least 3 classic books which helped to shape the world Meyer's fans love. Before we continue, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel I rant about fantasy books, discuss characters and lore, share my bookish opinion, and offer the occasional writing advice. If that sounds like your cup of blood, hit the subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. Having studied to attain a literature degree, and being herself a bookworm, Meyer's writing was influenced by several books. But in today's video, I'll be looking at 3, and exploring how each inspired the Twilight Saga. This isn't to say Twilight is as well written as these 3 books, but what Twilight drew from them definitely helped. First on this list is arguably the most famous book in literature. Romeo and Juliet, written by Shakespeare, has remained the darling of book nerds and literature professors alike, and that isn't changing. To be sure, Shakespeare isn't for everyone, but those who love his work do so with a passion, and Meyer is among the late writer's fans. While Meyer took inspiration from Shakespeare overall, leaning into a melodramatic tone and referencing such works as A Midsummer's Night Dream when addressing imprinting, Romeo and Juliet is the most obvious influence, and it's easy to see the parallels. Romeo and Juliet remains popular because it is a story of forbidden love, a trope that can never seem to be done enough. I've yet to see anyone complain about the forbidden love trope. It's timeless, and can be applied in multiple situations. Romeo and Juliet is loved for featuring a forbidden romance, and Twilight is adored for the same reason. In Romeo and Juliet, the 2 would-be lovers are separated because they come from 2 warring families. In Twilight, Bella and Edward are incompatible because Bella is a human and Edward is a vampire. In both stories, remaining together could endanger the lovers' lives, and we all know how Romeo and Juliet ends. Twilight even borrows something from the story's tragic tone. Like Romeo and Juliet, Twilight is moody and angsty. The relationship shared by Bella and Edward is more charged because it's forbidden, and the threat to Bella's life raises the stakes. In New Moon, Edward leaves, leaving Bella crushed. Ultimately, the Twilight Saga has a happy ending, but New Moon teased what Twilight would look like if true love didn't prevail. Twilight receives complaints for portraying an unhealthy love story, but you can't call Romeo and Juliet healthy either. Bella might look stupid jumping off a cliff, but at least she didn't kill herself. Twilight drew on that kind of overwrought drama intentionally, diving into the extremes of being lovelorn. And, healthy or not, you can't pretend either story is less entertaining for it. Twilight wasn't a tragedy in the end, but tonally, it was initially suggestive of one. As a fun fact, Romeo and Juliet actually borrowed its plot from another story, Pyramus and Thisbe. So before you accuse Meyer of stealing ideas from Shakespeare, keep in mind that Shakespeare was likewise influenced by those who came before him. As with Shakespeare, Meyer was inspired by a number of Austen's works. In Twilight, Bella is shown reading from a Jane Austen collection, a not-so-subtle nod to the author's love of Austen. But the story which shows the most parallels with Twilight is Pride and Prejudice. Again, I'm not trying to say Bella is Elizabeth Bennet. Austen's prose and characters are witty, clever, and human, while many of Twilight's characters, such as Bella's friends, can feel flat, though Alice and Charlie are great. What I am saying is that certain elements of Twilight worked, particularly those which were borrowed from Jane Austen. Before the genres of YA and romance made them cool, Jane Austen was killing it when it came to the love triangle and enemies to lovers tropes we still love today. When they first meet, Darcy is hostile towards Elizabeth, though Lizzie is not afraid to call him out for his poor attitude. In Twilight, Edward is likewise cold towards Bella. As with Darcy, he's aloof and carries secrets of his own. Also, both Darcy and Edward are rich, with Lizzie and Bella, while not being impoverished, being comparatively poorer. Both books play into our fantasies of happening to fall in love with someone wealthy who can take care of our every need, as well as our desire to connect with someone mysterious and hard to get. Darcy never expressed an interest in other women, making a point of not participating in dances, but his worldview was changed on encountering Elizabeth, just as Edward's was on meeting Bella. When you compare the two, the parallels stack up, and I actually did a comparison video earlier in this channel's creation, a topic I plan to revisit soon in another video. While Twilight isn't Jane Austen, the ideas it borrowed from Pride and Prejudice, timeless as they are, still hooked readers. Ultimately, Twilight was elevated, for good or for ill, by choosing to draw from what came before. The arc between Elizabeth, Wickham, and Lydia is emulated by Bella, Jacob, and Renesmee, and... okay, so maybe some plot lines were better left in the past. The secondary love interest attaching themselves to an underage family member was never going to have staying power, but I digress. For better or worse, Twilight stood out because of the ideas it took from Austen. As an aside, be sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying this video so far. For me, the third book on this list is one of the more interesting influences, because, like Twilight, Wuthering Heights is similarly controversial. Debates continue regarding whether Wuthering Heights should be treated as a romance or a thriller. After all, the romance portrayed in Wuthering Heights is far from healthy. At the same time, it's entertaining as hell to read. Twilight receives the same criticisms as Wuthering Heights for portraying a romance that's dysfunctional and toxic. But maybe that was the point. If Twilight hadn't been marketed as a romance, but rather as a drama or a thriller, people wouldn't be able to complain. After all, while we wouldn't want to emulate the relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff, it's entertaining. Heathcliff, like Edward, can be domineering. Catherine's taste in men, like Bella's, is questionable, if viewed through a real-life lens. Plus, there are the feelings experienced by the protagonists, the intense desire and emotions which, healthy or not, pull you into their world. Catherine, when kept apart from Heathcliff, works herself into an illness. She has a fit, and her physical health actually deteriorates as a result of her emotions. Heathcliff, meanwhile, never gets over Catherine and spends the rest of his life following her death in a state of melancholy. It doesn't matter how much money he has. Without Catherine, volatile as they were together, he's miserable, and people still connect with that, even if they find the coupling itself problematic. Bella and Edward are technically only dating, but the relationship is shown to be as intense, possibly even more so, as that of a married couple. When Edward leaves, Bella, instead of feeling gloomy for a few weeks and getting over it, spirals into a full-blown depression. Unlike Catherine, Bella doesn't broadcast her feelings, but she has them, because she struggles every day to conceal them, leaving her flat and numb to the outside world. Heathcliff has visions of Catherine on occasion, and there will be debates over whether he was literally seeing her ghost or imagining what he wanted to see, just as people continue to debate the meaning behind Bella hearing, or in the case of the movies, seeing Edward whenever she did anything dangerous in New Moon. Like the heroes of Wuthering Heights, Bella and Edward could be described as obsessive. They don't function well without the other, even if being together is toxic, and their thoughts are predominantly occupied by the other person. When Bella isn't thinking about Edward, she's thinking about Edward. When Edward isn't thinking about Bella, he's thinking about Bella. Heathcliff thinks about Catherine and then thinks about her some more, and Catherine, even when she marries another man, can't forget Heathcliff. When you realize that Twilight's relationship was modeled after Wuthering Heights, it makes sense, both why the relationship was controversial, as well as why people loved it. In Eclipse, Bella even compares herself directly to Catherine, and Edward, having disliked Wuthering Heights before, is prompted by Bella to find a Heathcliff line he can relate to, namely one in which Heathcliff discusses drinking blood. Some people have called Edward and Bella selfish, stating that they deserve each other, and the same comments have been made about Wuthering Heights. Given the story is told from Bella's perspective, we have to allow for an unreliable narrator. Edward is not perfect, but the story portrays him that way because it's told from Bella's perspective. And Catherine's viewpoint, were we to view it in the first person, would be similarly skewed. Interestingly, Bella, feeling guilty over her own behavior, actually asks herself during Eclipse if she is like Catherine, if she is someone selfish who ultimately hurts those she loves to get what she wants. Edward, in reading passages from Heathcliff, seems to identify with him. All this to say that, if Twilight's relationship is volatile, that may have been intentional. Granted, there's debate over whether either story should be classified as a romance, rather than as entertaining dramas. But whatever the case, such dysfunction can be fun to read about. For my part, I never sought to emulate either relationship, but I did find Twilight's dysfunction kind of fascinating, and the controversy could come down more to marketing, because within the realms of thriller or drama, we come there expressly to read about messy relationships and toxic dynamics. And for every person who found Twilight or Wuthering Heights romantic, there were those who just wanted to watch the shit show unravel. If you're one of those people wondering why Twilight became so popular and why it still grabs readers, this is one of the best answers I can give you. In previous videos, I've discussed why Twilight was popular, noting everything from Bella's relatability to some of the original ideas it had. But this, I think, is one of the better answers I've given. Some ideas, like forbidden romance or enemies to lovers, are timeless and will continue to proliferate in literature. 200 years from now, we'll still see these tropes, but Twilight didn't just borrow tropes from the authors that came before. It borrowed moods, plot lines, and tone, with varying levels of success. You might not think Twilight is well written, but it is improved overall by drawing from the works of the masters. From the charged relationship in Wuthering Heights to the tragic twists of Shakespeare, Twilight draws the best, and occasionally the worst, from what came before, mixing those timeless elements into something new you're free to love or hate. Whatever your opinion of Twilight, it benefited from its use of the classics, and if you look at its primary inspirations, it's not hard to find the DNA of the stories it borrowed from. There might not be any original ideas left, but sometimes that's exactly what allows a story to grab the imagination. All this to say that classic literature still has value. The ideas and archetypes within old stories still speak to us. And in the best of the books which came before, there are timeless elements, be it enemies to lovers or something universal to humanity as a whole. The books of the past still have something to say to us, if we're willing to look past their rough edges. Yes, some classics can read as regressive. Women run about supporting their husbands, and gay people are virtually non-existent. Classic books aren't perfect, but they should be read within the context of their time, and I'll always advocate for reading a mix of new and old books. If you want to learn exactly why classic books still have value, and what you can gain from reading them, click the video on the left. And if you'd like more Twilight content, click the video on the right, where I discuss a personal fan theory I have. As always, thanks for watching, and happy reading.